Hello, and welcome to Working Historians, a podcast series where we discuss what historians do with their lives. I am Rob Denning, Associate Dean for Liberal Arts for Southern New Hampshire University's online history programs. This is episode 2 of season 2. The blood is flowing, we're loosening up, and I've got the Rocky theme blaring in the background, but not really for royalties and copyright reasons, and we're ready for what comes next. Today, Jimmy and I are going to check in with our old pal Chris Kline, who today is the Senior Manager for General Education Evaluation Faculty at Western Governors University. Longtime listeners will remember Chris from our very first interview episode way back in 2017, which we will post as an encore presentation on Monday. Particularly eagle-eared listeners will remember that Chris also appeared in our Constitution Day discussion in 2019, where he talked about his research on the Whiskey Rebellion and the early constitutional period. In this episode, we're going to see what Chris has been up to since our last conversation. So, what have you been up to?
Well, yeah, so in terms of what I'm doing now, I'm still with Western Governors University. Couple different positions since we last chatted. I am now actually a senior manager of General Education Evaluation Faculty and our Excellence Award program. So I've had a couple promotions since we last talked, so excited about that and just moving forward in my career. WGU is a great place to be, just in terms of being student-centric, and I'm just really, really, really happy there. So enjoy doing that. I am also working on a Doctorate of Education.
Okay.
I am almost through all the coursework, and so that's been exciting, and that was something that I started actually right as the pandemic began. February of last year was my very first course. And
welcome to grad school.
Exactly. So you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything, you can't go anywhere, you work at home, so what better thing to do but go back to school, and but its timing's been great, and it's been a good experience, so moving through that. Looking to complete, this is just kind of rough right now, but probably May of 2023.
Okay.
Will be my completion date. So that's exciting.
What school do you go into, if you don't mind?
Liberty University.
Okay.
Just right down, I live in Lynchburg, so it's right here. I'm local, but I'm still online. So it was one of those things where, I'll be honest, I'd looked at different schools and things like that, and settled on Liberty. So good program. I'm excited about it. It's something I never thought I would do. I just kind of, honestly, we had all those conversations where we think about when we did the learning community on what next, grad school, things like that. And, we talk about the cost and things like that. And the only reason I never thought I would do it is I got to that age of 40 and I figured I would never get the outcome of it in terms of a financial end after you make the investment and things like that. And then I just figured I was still going to look around anyhow. And just with the direction that my career had taken, with kind of like more on the admin side, I'll say, instead of the faculty side and, kind of supervising faculty and all that, the EDD made a whole lot of sense, and the higher ed focus, and found out it wasn't quite as expensive as I thought it was going to be. So figured why not do it, and kind of, it was always a dream to have a doctor's degree. I just never thought it'd be an EDD, but I never thought my career would go the direction it was, because I used, when I was an undergrad, we all think that we'll be at Johns Hopkins by the time we're 40 and we'll have authored 3 books and everything will just be perfect, and then life hits you and it doesn't work out that way. So, yeah. But I think what I would say about that, though, is, the professional doctorates are something that any student should definitely always keep in mind as a potential possibility. It doesn't always have to be the research focus. And also with that, it's important to note there is a large element of research focus on the professional side as well. So, it's not an all or nothing type game, but there's a whole lot of different avenues that you could take a career, or your career could take you, and then it fits a different type of professional doctorate. So,
have you decided on a topic yet?
I have not. I'm still just trying to, a couple different ways I've been thinking about going. My work at WGU, like with our Excellence Award program, focuses all on student recognition. And we've done a lot of internal research on the benefits and the positives of student recognition. We actually have a blog post that we just submitted to Evolution blog. So that's awaiting publication, but it highlights our research around the positive impact of student recognition and the persistence lift that are provided to students. as a result of just kind of recognizing their good work. It focuses on the advantages of recognizing and cheering versus warning and things like that. So really just trying to put a focus on something along those lines, because it's captured a lot of my time as a result of work, but it's just so fascinating to look at and really interesting too. But I'm not sure what I would do with it at this point. But that's just kind of my initial thoughts, taking that a different way, maybe, differing programs, I don't know yet, but kind of thinking about something like that.
Right. So they'll look at positive reinforcement and reward versus, well, for lack of a better word, a more negative approach. And
yeah, and actually we just presented, myself and one of my team members, we presented at the Online Learning Consortium, and then also to the AAC&U within the last month. And, just really cheering versus warning. We warn students, if you don't do this, you're going to get dropped in the course, but then all of a sudden you have a student that's working their way through, and, they're really struggling, and then they get an award from a faculty member, just says, hey, great job. And what we did is, in our internal research, is just focused on any student who gets an award. And this is getting a little bit more specific than maybe you wanted, but anybody who gets an award has the opportunity to respond to it. So we took and analyzed those student responses based on what were they saying about the award. And what we found out was, most students, like 15% of our students, said about to quit, ready to give up. And then they got that one award. So while it puts the focus on how, when we think something is maybe small and menial, it's not to the student, because you never know what's going on the other side.
What's so amazing about that is, so I took my detour from higher education, God, 3 years, well, almost 3 years ago now.
You bailed on me about 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. October 15th, 2018. Not like I'm counting the days.
Yeah, me either.
Rob hasn't forgot. No.
But what's really amazing is it comes down to, it seems to come down to human psychology, because what you're saying resonates with everything that I've learned and the approaches that are most impactful with employees. So yes, if you give people raises and money, who's going to turn down raises and money? But at the end of the day, what keeps people is good relationships with their supervisors, knowing that their work is valued, knowing that they're valued, and knowing that they're part of something bigger. So it's that idea that those, an outdated term, those attaboys, attaboy, really good, using a gendered term, but really, like, it goes a long way with employees, especially if they're having a difficult day, or if you have, not that anybody has this, but some employees on your team that just aren't performing up to par of expectations, and others that are overperforming, or not overperforming, but performing beyond expectations. And if you don't give the people that are performing beyond expectations that positive reinforcement, they wonder why they're even bothering. Right? Like, so why am I even doing this? So-and-so over there sits under a tree half the day and doesn't even do his work. And I'm here, like, I've blown through all my work orders and +5 that were on schedule for tomorrow, and I don't even get any recognition. So it's really interesting how it must come down to human psychology and the dopamine release of reward and being shown that you're valued.
Yeah. And I think you put you take that and then apply it to the online learning format, for example. Okay, I'm a student myself, so I'll apply myself here. You're just learning on your own, and nobody realizes what that feels like until you've actually done it. I mean, I've been an online student before, so it's nothing new, but when you focus on the idea of getting that positive reinforcement, just that little good note or anything like that. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I submitted an assignment Sunday night, and I got my assignment back today with my grade, and my instructor gave me 2 extra bonus points on my essay because of all the detail I included. And, I mean, it was just a little note, and you might look at it and say it's 2 points, but you know what? When I read that, I had a big smile on my face when I was reading that feedback, just because it was recognized. As far as I was concerned, when I submitted it, I answered the question. I felt good about my answer. I felt comfortable, but it was a little bit of recognition that it means a lot to people. So. Yeah, a lot of good characteristics there. What else have I done? I have a real estate license now. I am a Virginia licensed real estate agent. Just
Congratulations.
something. Thank you. It was actually before I did that for 2.5 years now. It was something that just kind of did out of the blue. It was my wife's idea. I tell everybody when she shows up in my office door with her laptop in one hand and the yellow Lego pad in the other, I know to be scared. And out of that, it was she thought I should get a real estate license, which I'll be honest with you, totally out of context for me in terms of that line of work, but it's been really fun. It's something we do together, so kind of like a hobby. But at the same time, when I went back, I'm always been a firm believer in just teaching yourself something new every year. And for that, what I did that particular year was just focus on Virginia real estate law, and so it was totally interesting. Year before that, I got my certification to teach English as a second language, as a foreign language, excuse me, not second language, foreign language. So just doing something different every year, always trying to focus on professional development, keep your mind fresh. And that one year just happened to be real estate. So, like I said, it's been a lot of fun. But I've done a lot in the last few years, and it's just been really exciting, really encouraging, and forward thinking.
That's very
It's
cool.
fantastic.
Yeah, I almost ended up. I got this close to actually getting a paralegal degree a few years ago.
Oh wow.
It was partially in response to the academic job market, which is always a disaster, and I was just trying to figure out, okay, what do I do now? I guess I go back to school. So ended up not needing it and didn't finish it, but I do have an irritating amount of knowledge on like intellectual property law because I ended up focusing on that for a couple of semesters.
Yes, our paralegal, Dr. Denning, will see you now.
Yes, exactly. I was looking forward to having those interviews. So
I would hate to be in your class discussing, use of sources and how much you can actually use. So
I was taking it at the community college where I was actually teaching at the time. Like some of the instructors knew that I was an adjunct there, and so they're like, I know you from somewhere, like in the middle of class, and I'm like, yeah, I know, I teach history, and so yeah, I have students around me that they're like half my age, and yeah, it was a very awkward situation, but it all worked out.
yeah. Chris, now that you have your real estate license, have you developed any quirky habits like Phil from Modern Family, like tightrope walking or owning a magic shop?
No, nothing like that. Nothing like that. We do have rental property, and we do some short-term rental and long-term rental and things like that. I guess that's the closest we've ever gotten to a hobby with it. But it's interesting because like now my wife and I we'll drive around, we'll see a house for sale, or I'll have a showing or something like that. And it's like stand back and think, what could we do with this? And we also are now like collectors of all things furniture and appliances because you never know when you're going to need something for one of your rentals, right? So it's just that's the closest we've got with it, but it's fun.
Yeah, the housing market is just insane here. I mean, it's kind of insane everywhere, I guess, right these days. But in Ohio or in the Columbus area, there's just no inventory because people are scared to sell because they're afraid they're not going to find a new place to go to. And so any house that does come on the market, it's sold within hours for way over the asking price. It's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah,
all of that, all of the talk about flight from major California cities seems to only be a reality for renters because housing prices, I can tell you, have not gone down. And in fact, rental prices, while they were probably at their lowest in January or February, I think, have definitely started to turn around. So we're glad that we got into a bigger space when we did for the price that we did, because it didn't take long for the real estate market in San Francisco to recover from COVID.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk for a while there where people are like, ooh, now that everyone's going to be working from home full time, people are going to start moving out to the rural areas. And then things started to get better. And so suddenly maybe we're not going to be working from home forever. So wait, nope, cancel those plans. We got to get back to to where we started.
That's the thing you used to hear, and every now and then you still do, but like things closing down in New York City and whether or not we're going to be permanently impacted by the pandemic, like you just said, Robert, people are going to move to the rural areas and things like that. And, I'm sure some people might have done that or whatever the case might be, but I could just never in my mind visually see like New York City like becoming that desolate place like it was being described that it was leaning towards because of remote work and things like that. I had a hard time envisioning that.
Same.
And I think that was a lot of speculation that everybody was all of a sudden going to shift from home. I think, and I've, obviously we've all worked from home for a while, but I do think that there's always been a desire, even amongst those of us who do work from home. I mean, I do travel for work. Well, I did travel for work every now and then to Salt Lake City, and always looked forward to that. So I think those that have shifted to that home-based work, I have a feeling there's probably going to be some that want to go back. There might be some that start to do more of a hybrid model, but at the same time, I don't think it's all dramatically altered the way folks thought it would.
No, I'm probably looking at a hybrid model once we figure out when and how the people that went remote are coming back into the office. But it was a shift for me because, well, when in my previous incarnation as an associate dean, I was in the office. I had to move to Manchester, New Hampshire, was in the office every day until I was able to take that position remote. But then when I moved into my new role, I've been in the office every day until March 16th was the last day we were in the office. Shelter in place happened in San Francisco starting at 8 p.m. that night. So March 17th, 2020 was the first day of being fully remote. And everybody who went remote at that point is still remote currently.
Yeah, there's a lot of people at SNHU that were working in the on-site, and a lot of them just still gripe about not being happy with having to be remote. And so there are definitely some people that are really looking forward to getting back to going into work on site. There are a few people that worked on site that have gotten a little taste of working remote, and they're hoping that they'll be able to keep working remote, even though they're in the area. But there are definitely some who are grumbling about, who never stopped grumbling about having to work from home. And
hey, some people like the camaraderie. Some people have to be around, and I get it. I mean, everybody's different and things like that. I think it's all in how you looked at it beforehand. Obviously working remote during a pandemic and having the ability to continue uninterrupted was a good thing. I mean, no complaints there at all. So it's just been an interesting 2020. And I think I'm looking to see what lessons did we learn.
Yeah.
Where's our key takeaways from it? I was talking to somebody about this time last year, and I really felt at that point in time that we were going to have this rapid change, just as it relates to social safety nets and things like that. Was that going to develop? Was our infrastructure going to be a focus? And it seems like now all that is kind of starting to come into play a little bit, and we'll just see how far it goes. I think infrastructure side, it's nice to hear a focus on things like broadband technology being included with infrastructure in the 21st century, and recognizing that it's more than roads and highways and bridges, which are all important, don't get me wrong. But, infrastructure is now much deeper than that in the 21st century. So I think this pandemic it's exposed our gaps and our holes and our deficiencies. And I just hope that we see those now and take them as opportunities to fix them. And so that, if this ever happens again, God forbid, that it'll be a better experience in terms of the ultimate outcome, the length of it, and that we'll be able to move forward much quicker. So maybe that's wishful thinking, but,
No, I have a similar, you may remember, about a year ago, I put out a video for all of the instructors and students. Basically, I was kind of introducing some of the special measures that SNHU was going to take for like the extended late policy and extended incomplete. And so I put together a video for everybody to watch. And in that video, I was talking about how I think we're about to see the best that mankind has to offer, because we're all in this together. We're all going to wear masks. Everyone's going to be cooperating. It's going to be social distancing. It's going to be amazing. We're going to see a new era in human cooperation. And then, and then 2020 happened, and that prophecy didn't quite come to fruition, unfortunately. I might have to record a new one with a mea culpa on that. Yeah, I didn't see the insurrection coming.
No, no, no. And I mean, what more can you put at the end of 2020 other than a presidential election that went on and on and
Yeah.
on? Um, and then an insurrection, like you mentioned. We definitely lived through some history,
Mm-hmm.
and it was fascinating to observe, for lack of a better way to say it. Um, but always try to find, at least with me anyhow, I always try to find the historical parallels and connections in events that happen and where they were. And I have to say, I really struggled with the end of 2020 in terms of the things that were happening, as a result of the election, and then obviously January 6th and things like that. It was a challenging time, and I think it was a challenging time for the nation. And um, I fear that we did not learn lessons from that, though.
Same.
There was nothing that key takeaways from that. You still have a focus on um, half the nation divided over who really won the presidential election, and I find that unfortunate. That is putting into question our systems. That's putting into question our entire democratic process.
Yep.
And that's not healthy when it's questioned like that. And it's most certainly not healthy when it's questioned by those who are in a position of authority. That really undermines everything.
Yep.
So,
It seemed
and
to be
January 6th was just downright, I'm sorry, January 6th was just downright sad, and when you saw what happened and, to see scaling walls of the Senate chamber and rifling through Senate desks, you know, I hope that's never forgotten. And I'm glad there's images. I'm glad there's videos, because those will be preserved for posterity, regardless of any talking points that anybody tries to purvey on
Mm-hmm.
followers. So,
yeah, it seemed that from, well, probably, I know it started earlier, but it seemed to be a pretty rapid development from 2015 to 2020. Um, the unwillingness to actually assess sources or to take into account what those sources are. For me, it really put a spotlight on digital literacy
yep.
and generational digital literacy. There's a great podcast on the New York Times called Down the Rabbit Hole, which was talking about, part of it was talking about QAnon and conspiracy theories. But some of the major points that came out of that, where it was really generational. Parents who were never exposed to online sources before, who were never, weren't online a lot. The pandemic really changed that. It started to change before, but especially with the pandemic, not being able to go out and do things, you're online more, you're absorbing all of this information without a clear understanding of what's relevant, what's factual, what's reliable. So this idea that somebody's mother or grandmother could turn around and say, well, how can you tell me that this blog isn't reliable? It has 1 million views. You can't tell me that that's not reliable. And it's like, but what are the sources of the information? And one of the advantages that students especially students online, that they've learned digital literacy. We, at least in the program, we used to hammer it into their heads. You don't just go to Wikipedia and copy down anything that's there. You can use Wikipedia to look at the bibliography, but you probably shouldn't be using sources that are slanted, like maybe the National Review. Maybe you should be focusing on historical sources and data in order to develop clear arguments, and you should be considering multiple viewpoints as well. And that's something that I feel like there was a spotlight that was really shown on the inability or unwillingness of a lot of people to do that. And really, it also comes down to how many different things can you focus on. I think, traditionally, there was that sense that the newspaper and history books and what you learn in school, that you could rely on that was all real. That was real history. And as things just started to break down, it seems like all of those things were drawn into question with this logical fallacy that, well, if I've learned that this is wrong, then all of that information is suspect. So really all information is subjective. So I should just be able to pick and choose what I want to believe. And that definitely added to what we saw in 2020, I feel, and the ability for just anybody in a position with a soapbox to to stand up and say, no, I feel like this election was fraudulent, or no, they told me it was 66 million votes and I could win. I got 75 million. How is that possible? Well, if you don't understand how math works, I guess that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I really felt after, again, just thinking, about institutions of government and, basic American institutions, that are outlined in the three branches of government in the Constitution and all that. I really felt like the last 4 years I think they bent for the first time. And here's what I mean by that. After the 2012 election, I remember talking to somebody, and I didn't share with them who I voted for or anything like that. And I'm not going to talk about that now. But their comment was that they were sad that their candidate lost. And my response to that was, all elections have a winner and a loser. I said, but what we need to keep in mind is our system. Now, this is 2012, remember. Our systems are stronger than any one person and any one party. Presidents come and go. Parties change control of government. And we move on as a nation because our systems in place allow us to do that. And I really, after the last 4 years and what we went through from the election to January 6th, I think they were stressed for, I'm going to say, the first time in modern history. I firmly believe that. I know people like to point to Watergate, and all that. But when you look at Watergate, the thing is, it held. Everything held in place. It was, there was a lot of changes that came out of it. But what happened from that? The president was forced out of the White House. He was
And
forced
largely
to resign.
by his own party.
Exactly. At the end of the day, he resigned. And then you can go on from there if you want to talk about the pardon or things like that. That's a different story, different issue. But with what we've had up until this point, like I said, I think they were really stressed, with the exception of the judiciary. It's just interesting to think about how the judiciary held. You go back to that post-election cycle when we had lawsuits in various states and things like that. The judiciary held. And I think that's a testament to, the system in and of itself as it relates to a judicial process. Really putting the hold on those. I mean, there was some interesting lawsuits that were made, and there were some judges that you would have expected just based on backgrounds and things like that it would have probably have fit their political ideology to go ahead and take those lawsuits, but they didn't. They always came back to the Constitution. And I think that is a testament, though. But I think the system was still stressed.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
I think the other thing you could do is, sorry, Rob. I was just going to say, we talk about norms, constitutional norms. We've heard that a lot over the course of the last 4 years. And I think there's, constitutional norms and there's political norms. Maybe it's time to start thinking about taking some of these norms and putting them in statute. Just because all 44 presidents or 45 or pick your number have done something, it doesn't mean the others to come will.
Right.
And maybe there's a time to start looking at things like that. I mean, we can talk about this return to normalcy now with the current president, and because he's a product of he's come up through the system, he knows how things work and things like that. That's great for the next 4 years, but then what?
Yep. Right.
I mean, you could have a populist movement again.
Mm-hmm. If you've got someone competent who probably pursues the same types of stuff, oh boy.
Yeah. So it's fascinating to talk about, though. I mean, it really, really is when you start to dig into it and think about it, and just everything that happened.
Yeah, and I'm really keeping it in mind as I talk to instructors and course designers and all that about reshaping the history programs at SNHU, because even though we have been hammering digital literacy and all of that, it's fairly good at the grad level, but the undergrad level is just not there. And so I'm going to be pushing for that type of thing as we revise courses and all of that, because it's something that everybody has to get much better at, and we need to be. That's the only way we're going to be able to break out of the QAnon mindset that a lot of that has kind of polarized everybody on both sides of it. It's not just Republicans being bad. I mean, there are folks on the left end of the spectrum that say just as crazy stuff. They're not advocating for, the overthrow of government and all of that, but of course they don't have to right now because, our guy is there. But it is something that's going to be an ongoing problem, and it's something that I'm going to be pushing for in various updates to the courses.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this because obviously, like, between the three of us, we can solve this country's problems, right? So
sure.
I've been thinking about it, like, but
we don't even need My Pillow guy. Sorry, I had
to. But really, like, if we have these two sides that are so divided, even from what they believe ideologically, we're going to be in a constant back and forth every 4 to 8 years where we're never going to progress as a country. It's going to be undoing what the previous 4 did, implementing your vision, and then all of a sudden it changes again. And thinking through some of the things that I've learned a lot more about in the past couple of years, like change management and things like that. You don't bring people along. That's a really condescending way of thinking about things. What you do is engage people in conversations, because at the end of the day, we don't all need to think the same, but we need to hear each other, and we need to understand why people have the perspective they do. So just thinking through where I grew up, a lot of Trump supporters. But why are they Trump supporters? What's the core of why they support Trump or why they support the Republican Party? Because I'm sure that up until Black Lives Matter movement happened, being in a predominantly white area, race was the last thing on their minds. And all of a sudden they were confronted with something they've never had to be confronted with before, something that they didn't really think there was a huge problem with. And so where do they stand? So you're challenging their ideas and you're challenging what they believe in. So how do you turn that into a conversation versus going straight to, well, don't you know about white privilege? You're a recipient of white privilege. You need to be aware of this. Well, if you grew up extremely poor in a trailer in an area that's 99% white and you struggle to make a living your entire life, how do you think you're going to react the first time somebody tells you that you had privilege growing up? It's going to draw into question, like, everything that you thought about yourself. One, you probably never thought that you received an advantage over anybody else. So how can you sit here and tell me that I have privilege? I came up and through this, I finally made it to this point in my career, because they're not thinking in relation to what other populations and what other groups have experienced. They're just thinking through their own personal relation or their own personal situation, because we all process things through our own emotions. So having these logical conversations when people process things, 70% through emotions isn't going to work. So how do we hear each other? And how do we realize we're not all going to be on the same level, but at least have a conversation around it so we understand each other?
That's the biggest thing right there. Getting back to the ability to listen. I've always told students that, it doesn't matter what you believe. You still have to listen to the other side, because if you don't listen to the other side, you can't justify your beliefs, because you don't understand where they're coming from. Again, you don't have to understand them because you agree with them. You have to know where they're coming from so that you can refute them with your belief system and with facts. And then the other side has to have the ability to do the same thing. And I know that does call into question, well, how can both sides have facts? Because that's how it works, I mean, that's called a debate, that's just part of the process. But we need to get back to that. And I don't know how you do that if it's even possible in such a divided political system. In the environment we're in, the whole race conversation it's really central, I believe, to a lot of the division that we see, because what stems from that? Like you said, James, you have the privilege aspect, voting laws, that's all racial undertones to it. Unemployment has racial undertones to it. The ability to get ahead has racial undertones to it. And, if you're, like you said, a white person that struggled to get by, or maybe never fully recovered from the Great Recession. I mean, it's really hard to tell somebody like that, well, you're privileged. But there's a great book on it, White Fragility by Robin DeAngelis.
Yep.
Great read. that really highlights not necessarily, she doesn't focus on this idea of privilege as it relates to, well, it's because of what you have now. It's the way in which systems were developed and constructed that really has to be the focus of that type of conversation. Once you can get to that conversation, obviously race is not an easy thing to talk about. No social issue is ever an easy thing to talk about, especially in a political context.
Yep.
So,
all right.
Fascinating times.
Yeah, and it will be. I feel sorry for the poor historians who try to make sense of 2020 and 2021, try to dig through all those tweets and all of the it's going to be quite a magisterial tome when that book gets published.
Well, luckily we have to wait until what would it be, 2051 for records to be released to the public. And really, I once heard one of my professors said, nothing is history if it's less than 20 years old. So it's current events. But I mean, what is the statute for the release of executive files? And
I think it's 50 years.
Is it 50?
I think it's 50, but there's also an exception. I could be wrong on this, but I thought it was 50 years or a death. Doesn't the person have to have passed?
I think that's right. I think that's because I think that's why. Well, that wasn't a government thing. I think it. I was thinking of the Deep Throat with Watergate. He wasn't revealed until after he died, but that was a private agreement with Woodward and Bernstein, I believe. I don't remember what the actual.
I think it's an and or. But
I
it can also be extended because remember the Kennedy files, those were always routinely just extended by.
Yeah. I think it's basically if they can demonstrate that it has some sort of sensitive material in it, I think they can push it out pretty much indefinitely, as long as they can make a plausible case.
If it continues to be an issue of national security or something like that.
Yeah, sources and methods. Yeah, stuff like that. I don't know.
Because we can all submit a FOIA and get wildly redacted documents.
Yeah, right.
But one of the things that this latest administration brought into question is, I mean, just look at the use of Twitter. Just look at the use of Twitter or private email. I mean, if you aren't maintaining records of that and government business, which is public business, gets conducted via that, and then things are deleted or whatever, then you no longer have a record of that. So those are historical records.
Yeah. And I always really struggled with the use of a personal Twitter account for, well, especially the president, but really any government official, because what happens when they leave office, those get archived and you can still visit it. And, it has archived because it's been taken over by, the national records. But on a personal account, and you just go back to their statements, for example, we were told by the White House press secretary that those were official presidential statements. Well, if that's the case, should an official presidential statement be made on a personal Twitter account? Right. And if it is, now what happens that personal Twitter account has been taken down? There was an article several years ago and I don't remember, I share it in 510. 502 it is. 502 I share the article, but it's the national, or what was it? It was the National Archives. They used to save every tweet that was made. They had a deal with Twitter.
Yep.
And then they stopped that because I don't remember, was it 2010, 2012, sometime in which they stopped it because the record was becoming, I mean, obviously everybody's tweeting. So, but it's now you look at that and think, boy, it's a shame that they stopped doing that because of what you would have to add to that record.
Yeah.
And just to make sure that you actually had the record. So, but I think that raises, you remove the individual from it. That raises a very interesting issue related to social media. What is its role? And is it, go back to sources. Is Twitter a primary source?
Right.
It raises the interesting point because in theory, could be.
I'd say it is, yeah.
Yeah. It just.
I mean, you can still make the distinction between a first-hand account versus someone who's just retweeting something that someone else said. So, I mean, there's still this. I mean, you can still make distinctions there, but yeah, I think these are gut reactions to things that are happening by people observing them, or whether they're observing it face to face or observing or recording their impression of a news article or something that comes out or something. So I think that's all legit for primary sources. And it's going to be a disaster for someone to ever have to search through because, oh my God, having to filter through 8 billion tweets. Ugh,
but I can imagine oral historians using, especially if you're working on topics that have to do with culture or with society or even with politics. I mean, I can imagine oral historians utilizing Twitter in that way as the first person voice of the account holder.
Yeah.
And you can go on Twitter today and follow Thomas Jefferson, and he'll even tweet back to you. So it's just,
that's great.
It just, yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I go in there and talk to Cobra Commander sometimes.
Nice. You raise a good point about social media and the internet because, technology, especially being connected on the internet, has, for some people, really democratized voice, right? It's given a lot of people voice. It's also not allowed certain people in certain groups access. But it has created this space where everybody feels like they have a voice and what they say matters. And what happened, which is great, but then by extension, if everybody thinks that what they say matters and there's no real structure around that, then whose voice matters more? So through democratization and creating equality of voice, has that led to some of the issues that we're seeing now where blogs and people who just go online and rant, or people like PewDiePie who start out playing video games and then delve into, the cultural landscape, what their voice actually, once they hit 1 million viewers and more, their voice has an impact, but what responsibility is there? And then how do we value those voices? Which I don't know. I think it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Sorry, really bummed us out. Take that part out.
We'll see. Now this brief, 10-minute update has, we've gone 45 minutes now. So this very
we have a lot of editing, Rob.
Either that or this is just going to be a new standalone episode. We'll see how it goes. But
this is great catching up with you guys.
Yeah.
Nice chatting.
Yeah, it's
maybe
cool.
this is just a new format. We just sit down and chat.
This is what happens when you get 3 historians in a room.
Exactly.
Conversation goes all over the place and never comes to an end.
That's right. That's cool. That works
usually
too.
How our conversations go, Rob.
Yeah, pretty much. All right. Well, so for now, thanks for joining us, Chris.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Great chatting with you guys, and let's do it again sometime.
Definitely great to see you, Chris.
All right, good to see you as well, James. Take care.
And thank you all for joining us today. This episode appears on the Working Historians podcast feed, and you can subscribe to that feed on any podcast app, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Lyceum, Podbean, or whatever else you prefer. That way you won't miss any episodes, and you'll continue to hear about all the other cool stuff that historians do with their lives. If you have any questions or comments for this or any of our other podcasts, send us a message to workinghistorians@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at Working Historians and on Twitter at WorkHistorians. For Chris Kline and Jimmy Fennessy, I'm Rob Denning. Take care of yourself and each other.